held its annual conference in Washington, D.C. last week. It coincided with a vote last Thursday night, Friday morning, on the Republican skinny bill, the one the Republicans want to use to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. I don't believe the conference was planned to time with the vote, but it was very fortunate that it happened that way. Now, NICL is an international organization. Easily 1/3 of the participants this year came from Japan. Also, Pakistan and Nepal were represented. NICL is consciously working to spread its membership worldwide, both to have more clout and to assist in meeting the needs the common problems that disabled people have wherever they live. In Pakistan, for example, after a recent devastating earthquake, disabled Pakistanis jumped into their trucks and went to the decimated mountain village to rescue the injured. As they pulled people out of the rubble, they found some with pretty severe spinal cord injuries. What the disabled rescue workers brought to the injured that nobody else could was hope. The message they brought was that although, yes, you have a very serious problem, but it's not over. Your life is not over. We'll help you rebuild. The conference theme was inclusivity. I have never been to a more inclusive conference in my life. Black, brown, Asian, and white. As speakers addressed the crowd, there were large screens on both sides of the podium that displayed in large yellow letters on black background what the speaker was saying. Someone was sitting there transcribing as the person spoke. Standing to the side of the podium, addressing the crowd in sign language. There were several signers there, as they each worked about a half an hour, then they spelled each other so they weren't exhausted. There was a hookup also for the hard of hearing, as signs directed them to tune their listening devices to the specific channel. So they were making sure, absolutely sure, that everybody was on board with what was going on. There was also language translation, especially Japanese to English, as well as English to Japanese. There was a woman sitting next to me talking into what looked like a cell phone. Now I wondered what she was thinking because we had been instructed to turn our cell phones off. Then I realized what she was doing was talking into a microphone. She was translating as the speakers were speaking in Japanese. In addition to including people with every kind of disability, there were workshops that discussed reaching groups that were underrepresented, Muslims and transgender people. The conference was a fairly routine event with workshops and prep sessions for lobbying, which was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon after a march to the Capitol. The legislation that NICL wanted to stress included restoring funds to the independent living centers from the budget cuts, to defending the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, and a rejection of, quote, assisted suicide. NICL urged defeating a proposed law, H.R. 620, which would have lengthened the time to correct a complaint of no access. NICL's position was clear. Businesses have had 27 years to remedy non-compliance with the ADA. There should not be a longer period to resolve the issues that should have been rectified years ago. The legislation allows businesses to continue their wait and see if anybody notices approach to resolving access complaints. You will remember that when we marched in the Disability Pride Parade in New York, one of our slogans was, "Don't touch the ADA." On the matter of assisted suicide, NICL points out to the deadly mix between profit-driven medical health care system and legalizing assisted suicide. Assisted suicide is more cost-effective than treatment, so people in distress are guided to suicide. For one example, Barbara Wagner and Randy Stoop, two Oregonians with cancer, were both told by the Oregon Health Plan that the plan would not pay for their chemotherapy, but it would pay for assisted suicide.
Whoa.
Yeah. Our party's position is that the patient should have a choice on how to proceed regardless of cost. The expense of life-saving treatment should not be a factor. Without a doubt, the highlight of the conference, however, was the activity. The groups ADAPT and Nickel overlap. The activists in ADAPT do civil disobedience held leading positions in Nickel. Mike Oxford, the ADAPT person who told me about ADAPT winning a raise for their personal care attendants from the Kansas legislature, is a former president of Nickel. Bruce Darling, who sparked the sit-in at the McConnell's office last month, is running for president of Nickel next year. So they really overlap, with ADAPT taking the spearhead when it comes to demonstrations. Now Monday, there was a die-in in front of the Supreme Court, and after a deluge of rain, it moved to the sidewalk in front of the Russell Building. Activists stayed through Friday when the critical vote was called. You could measure the time passed, the time that the activists were in the die-in, by the stack of pizza boxes. It got higher and higher and higher. So, the die-in was called by the Philadelphia group ADAPT, who wanted to relieve the East Coast ADAPT activists because they had been protesting since before June, since March, actually. At the die-in, they raised the issue of the Koch brothers with chants and large banner. The Koch brothers had threatened to pull financial support from any Republican who would dare vote to continue the Affordable Care Act. Tuesday morning, there was a march to the Capitol. We lined up 2 by 2 along the side of the road and walked, rolled, and scootered over a mile to the Capitol. The line stretched out over 10 blocks long and was quite an impressive sight as we made our way up the hill. Everyone came. There were 880 participants at the conference. Blind participants walked with their dogs or with their hands on the shoulder of a sighted person. We chanted, "Strong and loud, disabled and proud," among other slogans. Passers-by were friendly and wished us luck, and cars honked in solidarity. Once we got to the Capitol, box lunches were passed out as speakers addressed the crowd. The speakers were all the Democratic congresspeople, starting with Nancy Pelosi, Chris Murphy, and Chuck Schumer, and several Latin congressmen from California. To a person, they asked us to keep up the pressure, which sort of annoyed me because what were they doing? But in retrospect, I think the fact that they all came out was a sign that they had gotten the message. There were no defections among the Democrats when it came to vote. By our presence, I think we strengthened their spine. After the speeches, the crowd divided up according to state and district and met with their respective congresspeople. Then they regrouped that afternoon at 5 p.m. This was the crucial part of the day's demonstration. They got the word that the procedural question was coming up to vote. The decision was whether or not to vote on the Republican health care bill. Prior to the vote, the demonstrators filed into the Capitol building, dividing themselves between the balconies, which they jammed, and marching around on the ground floor. They all chanted, "Don't kill us, kill the bill," in a resounding roar. The Capitol Police marshaled the demonstrators off the floor, corralled them in a corner, but didn't charge them. They continued chanting. The demonstrators regrouped and resolved to continue the protest. They camped out in front of the Capitol until Thursday night, after midnight, so it was Thursday night, Friday morning, waiting for the vote. As you know, when it finally came down to the wire, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and John McCain from Florida voted no, and the bill was defeated. Cheers rang out from the crowd in front of the Capitol. The activists had defeated the bill. They were the real heroes of the day.
Right.
Trump continues to react to the defeat, however. He fired Reince Priebus, his chief of staff, in part because he couldn't get the bill passed. Trump continues to threaten to hold up funds intended to aid people who cannot meet the insurance premiums of the Affordable Care Act. So the activists are digging in. They agree that we haven't seen the last of this fight. My dream is to see a march of 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people on the Capitol like we organized during the anti-Vietnam War era. As capitalism collapses, the most vulnerable will be hurt. It is our job to organize the defense.
Right.